There is a story told in the old monasteries of the Himalayas about a monk who spent 20 years searching every corner of the world for a single treasure, the feeling of being at peace with himself. He climbed sacred peaks, crossed desert valleys, and sat at the feet of teachers whose names have long since returned to silence. And at the end of those 20 years, exhausted and humbled, he returned to the small stone courtyard where he had begun. His teacher, who had never left, was sweeping fallen leaves with a thin bamboo broom. The old man looked up, studied the monk's weathered face, and said very quietly, "You have been looking for yourself in every place except the one where you actually live." The monk asked where that was. The teacher simply touched his own chest and returned to sweeping. That story is not about defeat, it is about direction. Most of us have spent years, sometimes decades, searching for the feeling of being enough through the approval of other people, through achievements stacked like proof, through relationships we hoped might finally confirm what we couldn't confirm ourselves. And still the feeling slips away, like water through cupped hands. This video is not a lecture. It is an invitation to turn the search around, to stop looking outward for a verdict that only lives within you, and to understand, through 3 surprisingly specific and rarely spoken truths from Buddhist thought, why loving yourself is not a luxury or a self-indulgent idea, but the most practical, grounded act you will ever perform. Pillar 1. The myth that self-love is something you earn. Somewhere along the way, most of us absorbed a quiet but persistent belief that we must earn the right to feel good about ourselves. We learned it subtly, through gold stars given for performance, through love that seemed to appear only when we behaved well, through a culture that measures human worth in productivity and output. And so we built a kind of internal ledger. On one side, our accomplishments, our good deeds, our moments of discipline. On the other, our failures, our weakness, our embarrassing memories. We told ourselves that when the first column finally outweighs the second, we would be permitted to love ourselves. We would finally deserve it. Buddhism does not recognize that ledger, not because it is careless about growth or indifferent to effort, but because it understands something far more fundamental about the nature of what you are. The word the Buddha used again and again was not deserving, it was already. You are already whole, not in a naive, sugary sense, but in the way that the sky is already vast, whether clouds are passing through it or not. The clouds do not make the sky simply holds them. Your fear, your regret, your self-criticism, these are the clouds. They arise, they move, they dissolve. But underneath them, the awareness that witnesses them is untouched. This is perhaps the most misunderstood teaching in the entire tradition of Buddhist thought. People hear you are already whole, and they imagine it means they should do nothing, change nothing, work on nothing. But that is not the teaching. The teaching is closer to this. You do not need to fix yourself in order to begin treating yourself with kindness. A gardener does not wait for the soil to be perfect before watering it. She waters it because she wants it to grow. Self-love is not the reward at the end of self-improvement. It is the soil in which genuine growth becomes possible at all. Think for a moment about someone you love without condition, a child, a close friend, a parent. When they struggle, when they fail, when they say the wrong thing or fall apart at the seams, you do not revoke your love. You offer it more fully, because that is exactly when love is needed most. Buddhist wisdom asks a simple and quietly devastating question. Why do you not extend that same quality of care to yourself? What makes you the single exception to the compassion you so freely offer others? The answer, in most cases, is not logic. It is a very old habit. And habits, however deeply worn, can be softened. There is a practice in Tibetan Buddhism called metta, or loving kindness meditation. In its traditional form, you begin by directing warmth and goodwill toward yourself, not because you have earned it, not because you are perfect, but simply because you exist, and suffering is real, and kindness costs nothing. What makes this practice radical is not its technique, but its sequence. You start with yourself, not with a distant stranger, not even with a friend, with yourself. Because the love you cannot give to yourself is the love you will struggle to authentically give to anyone else. You cannot pour water from an empty vessel. You cannot offer what you refuse to receive. Pillar 2. The myth that your inner critic is keeping you safe. Most of us live with a voice. Not a voice from outside, but one that runs quietly beneath almost every experience. A constant low-frequency commentary on whether we are doing enough, looking right, sounding intelligent, taking up too much space, or not enough space. This voice speaks with great authority. It knows our weakest points. It rarely shouts. It whispers, in the tone of reason, in the language of concern. And we have, over the years, made a fundamental error. We have mistaken it for wisdom. The inner critic does not exist to help you. It exists because at some earlier point in your life, criticism felt like preparation for a blow that hadn't landed yet. If you criticized yourself first, perhaps no one else could wound you. If you kept your expectations low, perhaps disappointment couldn't reach you. The inner critic was a form of protection, and like all protections, it served its purpose once. But armor that keeps you safe in a storm will suffocate you on a clear day. Buddhism speaks of something called dukkha, a word often translated as suffering, but more accurately described as a kind of friction, the subtle dissatisfaction that arises when we are in resistance to what is. Self-criticism is one of the purest forms of this friction. Every time you tell yourself you are not enough, you are resisting the reality of your own existence. You are arguing, quietly but constantly, with the fact of who you are right now. And that argument is exhausting. It doesn't produce growth, it produces fatigue. Real transformation does not come from the cracking whip of self-judgment. It comes from something far more patient and far more powerful, the quiet, steady attention of someone who genuinely cares. Consider what happens when you make a mistake and respond to yourself with the same gentleness you would offer a dear friend. You do not collapse. You do not become reckless. You actually see the situation more clearly, because shame and criticism narrow the mind's field of view, while compassion widens it. Research in contemplative practice confirms what Buddhist monks have always known intuitively. A mind that feels safe enough to acknowledge its failures is a mind that can actually learn from them. Self-compassion is not softness, it is precision. It is the clear-eyed practice of seeing yourself honestly, without turning that honesty into a weapon. In Zen calligraphy, there is a form called enso, a circle drawn in a single brushstroke. Sometimes it closes perfectly, more often it does not. And the masters say the incomplete circle is often the more truthful one, because it acknowledges that life is not sealed and finished, that there is always space for breath, for movement, for what has not yet arrived. You are an enso, not a flaw to be corrected, a living, unfinished circle with deliberate space inside it. The next time your inner critic rises, you do not need to argue with it, silence it, or shame it for existing. Simply notice it the way you would notice whether it arose. It will pass. You are the sky, not the storm. Pillar 3. The myth that self-love is separate from how you live each day. Self-love is not a feeling you wait to feel. This is perhaps the most practically important thing in this entire teaching, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. We tend to think of self-love as an emotional state, something that either washes over us or doesn't, something we either have or lack. We wait for the morning when we wake up and simply feel good about who we are. But that morning, if we wait passively for it, may never come, because self-love is not primarily an emotion. It is a practice. It is expressed in the 10,000 small choices you make each day about how you treat the person you spend every single moment of your life with, yourself. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote that the most important relationship in your life is the one you have with the present moment. To love yourself is to show up for yourself in the present moment, not in the future, when you are thinner, calmer, more successful, more healed. Now, in the body you have, in the life you are actually living. This presence is an act of love. Choosing to sleep when your body is exhausted is an act of love. Choosing to speak kindly to yourself after a hard day is an act of love. Choosing to set a limit with someone who consistently diminishes you is an act of love. None of these require a grand transformation. They require only a small and daily willingness to treat yourself as someone whose needs are real and whose presence on this earth matters. There is a concept in Buddhist thought sometimes called ahimsa, which is usually translated as non-harming. We speak of it most often in terms of how we treat others, with care, with gentleness, without cruelty. But the tradition is clear. Ahimsa begins at home. It begins in your own mind, in your own body, in the way you speak to yourself, in the silence between your thoughts. Every harsh word you direct inward is a small act of self-violence. Not dramatic, not visible, but cumulative, in the way that drops of water, falling in the same place long enough, can wear through stone. And over years, that erosion becomes your inner landscape, a terrain that has been shaped by unkindness and now finds it difficult to recognize love even when it arrives. The reversal of this is not complicated. It is consistent. It is the practice of catching the harsh word before it finishes, forming and choosing, even imperfectly, a kinder one. It is the practice of meeting your own gaze in the mirror with something warmer than appraisal. It is the small, daily ritual of asking yourself, not what is wrong with me today, but what do I actually need right now? That question, asked sincerely and answered honestly, is a form of meditation. It is the soul paying attention to itself. And here is what shifts when this practice deepens over time. You stop waiting for the world to tell you that you are enough, because you are no longer asking the question from a place of hunger. You have already answered it quietly, imperfectly, day by day, with your choices. And the world, strangely, begins to reflect this back. Not because you have broadcast your transformation or performed your worthiness for any audience, but because the quality of energy you carry through a room, through a conversation, through a relationship has changed. You no longer need what you once sought so desperately, and need, in the Buddhist view, distorts everything it touches. The moment you stop clinging to external validation as a source of inner stability, that stability begins to arise from within. And what arises from within does not shatter when the circumstances outside change. The monk in the story eventually understood what his teacher had been showing him all along, not with words, but with the unhurried quality of his movements, the ease with which he occupied his own presence, the way he neither shrank from the world nor grasped at it. The teacher was not demonstrating enlightenment as something elevated and distant. He was demonstrating something far more accessible. He was showing what it looks like when a person has simply stopped arguing with the fact of their own existence. You do not need 20 years of searching. You do not need a mountain, a monastery, or a moment of dramatic revelation. You need only the willingness to begin, today, to treat yourself as someone worth the effort of knowing. To slow down enough to hear your own breath, to speak one kinder sentence to yourself than you did yesterday, to notice the harshness and choose, even once, not to amplify it. These are not small acts, quietly, invisibly. They are the acts that change a life. Buddhist philosophy does not ask you to become someone new. It has never asked that. It has only ever pointed, with great patience and extraordinary gentleness, back toward what you already are. Beneath the self-criticism, beneath the old habit of measuring your worth against a standard that shifts like sand, beneath the exhaustion of trying to be enough for a world that has never had the authority to tell you whether you are, there is something steady, something that has been waiting quietly through every hard season, something that does not need to be fixed or improved or proven. It only needs, finally, to be acknowledged. You are that something. You have always been that something. And the moment you stop running from that truth and allow yourself to simply rest in it, not perfectly, not permanently, but right now, in this breath, that is when the real work begins. Not the work of becoming, but the work of remembering. Remembering that you were never as broken as fear insisted. Never as unworthy as the inner voice claimed. Never as far from peace as the search made it seem. If this reached a quiet place in you, stay close. Each week, we return to the ideas that slow the world down and remind us who we are beneath the noise. And for now, come home to yourself. It is the most courageous thing you will ever do.